Do you think silence in a family says more than shouting?
I will start with the part people usually skip because it is messy and embarrassing and easy to judge from the outside. And I am fine with that because I am tired of swallowing the story to protect other people's feelings while mine get sanded down to nothing. So here it is, as clean as I can say it, over coffee, without sugar and without a smile I do not feel. I asked my parents for help with my rent for the first time since I was a teenager, and they told me they could not do it. They were sorry. The timing was bad, money was tight, and maybe I should rethink some choices, which landed like a slap because for years I have been the choices person, the responsible one. The steady voice in the group text who reminds everyone when bills are due and whose name gets used when someone wants to sound like they have their life together. I did not ask because I am reckless or because I forgot how to add. I asked because life threw me a run of bad cards in the same month and I could not reshuffle fast enough. And if you have ever had a stretch where the car needed work the same week your insurance premium jumped and a freelance client paid late while your main job cut overtime, you know how quickly a sensible budget turns into a tightrope, and how humbling it feels to step onto that rope knowing you have been the net for everybody else for years. I had already sold a couple of things I loved. I had already taken on a side shift I did not want. I had already negotiated with my landlord for a little grace. And I figured a short loan from my parents would close the gap and let me breathe while I caught up. I went over there in person because I thought that mattered, because I grew up being told to show up when it counts, so I sat at their table and explained the math in plain English. I did not cry. I did not beg. I said I would pay them back across 3 months and could even put it in writing if that made them feel better. And my dad cleared his throat and stared at the edge of a placemat while my mom did that careful tone she uses when she wants to sound loving while delivering a no that will be blamed on the universe, telling me that things have been unpredictable lately and they have to be cautious, and they hate that they cannot be the safety net they want to be for both their daughters, which sounded generous until you hear the phantom word in that sentence. The word both, because it suggests we have been receiving the same weather from them, which is a joke I no longer laugh at. I thank them anyway because that is what I do. I made a light comment about figuring it out. I stood up and hugged them and pretended my throat was not burning, and I went home and I figured it out. Which meant a little more debt on a card I had worked for years to keep clean, a couple of long nights at the side gig, and a decision to drop anything that was not essential, and to my own surprise I felt not rage but a sort of clear, heavy quiet. Like a door had finally closed in a house I did not know was drafty, and inside that quiet was an old memory of their favorite line about me, that I am strong, that I do not need help, that I always find a way, which is a compliment until it becomes a reason to leave you standing alone. I told exactly 2 friends because I did not want the pity face or the lecture, and both of them asked the same normal question. Did I tell my parents that it was urgent? And I said yes, and one friend said parents can be weird about money. And the other said she was sorry, and then they each sent me dinner without asking, and I ate and slept and worked and kept the rope steady under my feet, and I told myself that disappointment is just information, and I should remember it without letting it turn me into someone I do not want to be. A couple of weeks later, my sister called in that breezy way she has when she wants to sound casual about something she knows is not casual, and I answered because I was walking between tasks and did not have the energy to rehearse any version of myself. So we talked about nothing for a few minutes, the way siblings do when they are circling a point, and then she dropped it like it was a funny coincidence, like it was just family news, like it was something I would clap for, saying that mom meant Dad had come through for her in a big way, and she was finally free of that weight that had been hanging over her since college, and it took me a second to understand what she meant. And when I asked her to say it directly, she said they had paid off the rest of her student loans, every penny, and she laughed because she said it felt surreal to open her account and see zeros. I wish I could tell you I swallowed it with grace and found a noble thought. I did not. I stood still and listened to my pulse pick up, and I heard myself say that was great and that I was happy for her because I am not a monster. And she kept talking, and I heard none of it because inside my chest the quiet turned into something bright and precise. Not a scream, but a click, a clean understanding of what the scoreboard has always looked like even when I pretended not to see it, and I could feel My spine lengthened because nothing was fuzzy anymore, and if you have ever had a moment where love and history tilt and a pattern you have defended with jokes becomes undeniable, you know the sensation I am trying to describe without dressing it up. I ended the call politely. I did not ask if she knew I had been turned down. I did not text anyone a screenshot rant. I did not call my parents to demand an explanation they would deliver with soft tones and careful phrases. I just sat with it and let the facts stack themselves, because facts do not need adjectives, they only need room, and I realized that for years I had been giving them so much room to be disappointing that they did not even recognize it as a gift. Here is the part that shifts everything for me and sets the rest in motion. The part that will make some people shout that I should have confronted them immediately and others not, because they have learned the hard way that confrontation is not the only path to justice. Because while my sister was still talking about interest rates and relief and the celebration dinner our parents wanted to throw for her, I looked at the call timer and thought about how I had kept my promise to figure things out alone, and how they had kept their pattern alive without even flinching, and I knew I would not yell, and I would not plead, and I would not explain. I would do something simpler and far more permanent, something they would not notice until it was already done. And right before I hung up, she said a sentence that sealed it for me, a sentence you will understand when you hear what came next. The sentence my sister dropped, the one that locked everything into place with the kind of blunt clarity you cannot unhear even if you try, was said in a tone that was meant to be kind and maybe even conspiratorial. Like I was supposed to feel included in some inside joke, because she said that Mom told her not to feel bad since I have always been the stable one who does not need help, and that I would understand. Which is a neat way of turning someone's reliability into a piggy bank everyone gets to spend except the person who earned it, and I stood there nodding at nothing while a whole reel of family moments lined up in my head, not with violins or soft lighting, but with receipts that finally got sorted into columns. Because this has never been about one payment or 1 month or one loan. It has been a long run of small choices that always landed in the same direction while I kept telling myself not to make a fuss because it was not worth it, because I was fine, because I had standards and pride and a backbone and all the other words they like to paste on me like a label when they need me to be quiet. Once you hear the sentence, the old scenes sharpen on their own, and I can see the years where I brought my own folding chair to every family problem and did the unglamorous work while my sister's crises got names and parties and family meetings. Because when Sophie wanted a wedding that was past the budget, there were hushed conversations and a gentle envelope that somehow appeared to cover the overages, and when Sophie's first car died because she skipped oil changes, there was a weekend of calls and a cosign I learned about after the fact, and when Sophie decided to take a break from work to reset, there was rent help wrapped in concern. While my version of support was always a thumbs up and a speech about being proud of me and how inspiring it is that I manage on my own, which is an odd flavor of praise when you realize it functions like a locked door with a pretty wreath on it. I can list the little moments that used to feel like nothing and now feel like a map, like when I covered the deposit for our parents' anniversary party because the venue needed it that day and no one else had a card with space. And the plan was that everyone would pay me back over the next month, and they each did, except my parents forgot, and I told myself it was not a big deal because I could swing it, and they would do the same for either of us if they had thought of it first, which is exactly the kind of story you tell yourself when your role in the family is to be the adult under all circumstances, even during the years when you are barely keeping your own boat from taking on water. And you keep playing that role because people like you better when you make their lives easier. I know someone listening to this will say I should have said something sooner, I should have set boundaries, I should have drawn a line in the sand, and I would nod if that made me a better person in the story. Except the truth is I did not speak because the cost of being the one who names the pattern in a family that runs on denial is that you get recast as the problem, the bitter one, the jealous one, the spreadsheet with legs. And I was not going to stand there and become their villain for asking them to look at the simple math of who gets asked to sacrifice and who gets rescued. Instead, I decided to do what they always assumed I would do, which is fix my own life, and I added something they did not expect, which is to stop letting them spend my presence like it is free. I did not confront, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood the game, and the game runs on access, on the belief that I will always be reachable, always be available for the thoughtful call, the little favor, the last-minute save. The long talk that soothes and solves, and if you remove that belief quietly, without a speech or a scene, the entire system wobbles, and you learn quickly who actually respects you and who respects only what you provide. So I looked at my phone and did nothing. I let texts sit until they were no longer urgent. I let calls roll into the recorder that writes a polite transcript. I answered when I had time and bandwidth and left it there. And in the space I used to give to emotional maintenance, I built a plan for myself with the same care I used to pour into everyone else's emergencies. I took extra shifts where I could without breaking. I trimmed every expense that could be trimmed without wrecking my sanity. I made a list of what I owed and in what order it would be paid, and I treated it like training, not punishment. Because I was done using the word shame for things that were just math, and I reminded myself that I had asked for a small bridge and they had declined, and that decision meant I was no longer obligated to perform gratitude for a support system that only materialized when the camera was on my sister. I told no one at work and no one on social media, and I did not hand my parents an easy scene where they could tell me I was being dramatic. I gave them nothing but silence and confidence. And it is amazing how fast silence becomes suspicious when people are used to your constant yes. Word travels in families even when you do not speak, and I started hearing through cousins that my parents were confused about my distance, and there was that phrase again, confused, which is the polite wrapper for the reality that they had never paid attention to how this looked from my chair because paying attention would have forced them to choose differently, and one cousin said my mom was worried I was mad about something. And I almost laughed because the idea that I would be furious over one episode is how you keep the pattern hidden. You reduce the whole history to 1 month and treat it like a misunderstanding, while the truth stands there in plain numbers, so simple you could teach it to a child. I gave them time to notice, and they did not really. They noticed the temperature change, but not the thermostat, which is why when my sister called again, this time with the brightness turned up and the tone that always signals there is an ask coming wrapped in a joke, I answered and listened without rescuing her from the awkward lead-in, and she finally said there was a little favor I could help with, nothing big, just a signature to smooth out a situation so everything could move forward. And before I replied, I decided that this would be the moment the pattern stopped repeating, and I would show them what stability looks like when it stops subsidizing everyone else. When Sophie finally stopped circling and admitted the favor was not small at all, but the kind that binds you to someone else's chaos for years, she said she needed a cosign for a mortgage because her credit score was still limping and the bank wanted another adult in the room to promise that if she missed payments the bank could come to me. And she tried to make it sound harmless by saying that it would just be paperwork, that nothing would ever actually happen, that she and Mark had a plan and that this was just to get the rate they wanted, and I listened without interrupting because I've learned that if you let people explain the thing they want from you long enough, they will eventually tell you exactly why you should never do it. And when she finally breathed, I said I would think about it, and I would need to see the full picture, not the version she tells herself when she is trying to sleep, and she said sure, of course, absolutely, and I could hear the relief in her voice because she was already picturing the signature and the housewarming, and I hung up and opened a new list with 2 columns, one for what I had been doing for years that made their lives run, and one for what I would now stop doing in a way that was quiet but unmistakable. Not to be cruel, but to rebalance the equation they kept pretending did not exist. In the first column, I wrote all the free labor roles I had carried like some strange family internship that never ended, the bill reminders I sent in the group text at the end of every month, the tax filing checklist I emailed our parents in early spring because Dad always forgot a form and Mom always pretended she did not, the holiday travel spreadsheets that saved them money and kept them from melting down at the last minute, the subscriptions I had set up under my accounts years ago because it was easier and cheaper to do a family plan when I was the only one with a steady card, the streaming services with my email, the cloud photo album I organized after our grandmother died so they would have a place to dump scans, the emergency contacts list I updated every year, the quiet Venmo transfers that bridged gaps for birthdays and minor emergencies without fanfare, In the second column, I wrote simple actions that would reverse the flow without speeches or accusations, because I was done narrating my decisions to people who had made theirs in whispers and called that love. I started by drafting an email to the family that read like a routine housekeeping note. Nothing dramatic, just that I was consolidating accounts and unsubscribing from anything tied to my personal payment methods. And that by the end of the month they would each need to set up their own logins. And I even pasted a short how-to for the technically challenged, because I was not trying to create chaos. I was demonstrating cost. And I sent it with a calm subject line, and then I went into every account and removed their devices from my profiles, and I changed passwords like a person turning off lights in rooms she no longer occupies, and I was surprised by how light my phone felt afterward. And that is when I realized that quiet can be its own form of revenge when what people have been taking from you is invisible labor they never priced, because they never had to. Then I turned to money, not theirs but mine, and I made decisions that would keep me from ever being in that rent gap again. Not because I judge past me, but because I do not want to hand them a future opportunity to feel generous or to rewrite our history with a single check. So I called my landlord and negotiated a 12-month renewal with a small decrease in exchange for handling some building tasks I already do out of habit. I moved my side gig hours to one consistent block so they did not cannibalize my rest. I opened a separate account for the side gig income so it did not disappear into daily spending, and I set auto payments on the card I had leaned on so I would not waste energy thinking about it. And the simple act of treating my own security like a non-negotiable made me feel like I had just walked out of a room where someone had been talking over me for years. When Sophie sent the documents she thought would make me say yes, I opened them and did what I always do. I read every line and asked questions she had not considered. Not to flex, but because if I am putting my name on something, I want the truth. And the truth was there in plain ink, a thin savings cushion, a rate that only worked if nothing went wrong, a job history with gaps she was sure would not be repeated because optimism counts as income in her world, and I could feel the old part of me wanting to fix it, to make a plan, to call our parents and stage a whiteboard session where the adults solve the children's lives. And then I remembered that in this family the children are not defined by age, but by who gets rescued. And I put the pen down and decided to answer her with a sentence I had heard recently in a different voice. Before I called her back, I made another quiet change that mattered only to me but felt monumental. I pulled myself out of the family group calendar where I used to keep track of birthdays, school concerts, doctor appointments, and little anniversaries that somehow always translated into me baking, buying, driving, or apologizing for someone else's forgetfulness. And I set my phone to deliver those dates only to me because I still care and I still like to send a message when it feels right, but I am done being the engine that makes other people look thoughtful while they coast, and in the same hour I blocked the temptation to fill the silence with explanations by deleting the long draft text I had typed about fairness and patterns and history, since I knew they would never read it as information, only as attitude. When I finally called Sophie, I kept my voice steady and I used the exact words Mom used on me, not because I was trying to be clever, but because symmetry is a form of truth. And I said that I am not comfortable mixing money with family, and that my situation is unpredictable, and I have to be cautious. And I said I am sure she and Mark will figure it out because they are resourceful. And I let the sentence hang between us like a mirror, and she was silent for a beat that felt longer because she recognized the phrasing even if she could not place it, and then she tried to guilt me with a soft voice about how we are supposed to help each other, and I said that is exactly what I have been doing for a very long time, and I am going to help in a different way now. By not making promises I do not want to keep, and I wished her well on the house search, and I ended the call before the negotiation phase could begin because the only thing that needed to be said had been said. For the first time in years, I did not rush to soften it with a follow-up message. I did not deliver a care package to prove I was not mad. I did not call our parents to preempt the version of the story where I am cold or selfish. I just went quiet and watched the ripple, and it arrived on schedule because within an hour my mom's name flashed on my screen with a cheery tone I know too well, the one that means I am about to be asked to be reasonable for the sake of the family, and I looked at the Call. I looked at the calendar I had just reclaimed, and I let the phone ring until it stopped, and that little sound was not cruel or petty. It was the bill coming due for a role I was no longer auditioning for. And when the voicemail notification popped up, I did not press play. I put the phone face down and opened a different tab that had nothing to do with them. The one where I had been running my own numbers and sketching a plan that would make their opinions irrelevant. Because if I was done being the co-signer of last resort for their lives, I could finally sign something just for me. When my mother finally got me on the phone, 2 days after letting her cheerful voicemail sit unplayed, she tried to weave her concern into something that sounded like casual family talk, asking how work was going, whether I had any plans for the weekend, and slipping in little asides about how Sophie was under so much stress with the house situation and how the market was brutal right now, as if she were talking about the weather and not carefully steering toward the moment where I would offer to fix the problem she clearly thought I had created by saying no, and I let her keep going because I wanted to see just how directly she would say it. She never did. She came as close as she could without losing her plausible deniability, saying that family helps family, and sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love, which was a nice sentiment if you stripped it of the irony that in our family, those sacrifices had always come from me, not to me. I told her calmly that I had already explained my position to Sophie, that I did not feel comfortable being financially tied to something I did not control, and that I hoped they would find a solution that worked for them. And I could practically hear the pause where she realized I wasn't bluffing, that there was no guilt trip strong enough to make me reverse the decision. She changed tactics immediately, softening her tone into the one she uses when she wants to remind me of our special bond, saying she just didn't want any tension between us because life is too short. Which sounded lovely except for the fact that she had no problem letting me carry the tension for decades, as long as it kept things smooth for everyone else. From that point on, I stopped trying to dodge these conversations politely and started treating them as rehearsals for the life I was building without their safety net, or rather, without the illusion of one. I doubled down on my plan to take my own money, my own work, and my own stability completely out of their reach, and part of that meant looking for something permanent that would give me both security and leverage. Something that would make it impossible for them to ever again dangle help over me like a carrot they had no intention of actually giving. I started looking into property, not in some dreamy way like scrolling through listings I couldn't afford, but seriously, with my numbers laid out, my savings plan in motion, and my side gig income growing steadily. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it. I didn't confide in friends who might accidentally mention it, and I certainly didn't give my family a reason to think I needed their opinion. Every time I got an update from the bank or found a listing worth visiting, I felt a quiet thrill that had nothing to do with the square footage and everything to do with the fact that I was making a major move that would change my life without their fingerprints on it. While I was touring places, Sophie was apparently escalating her complaints behind the scenes. I heard from a cousin that she had started framing me as difficult lately and implying that I was holding a grudge over the student loan payoff. The funny thing was, she said it in a way that made it sound like the payoff had been a tiny, forgettable thing, like a Starbucks gift card, not a $20,000 debt wiped clean. I didn't bother defending myself to anyone who brought it up because I had learned the hard way that in our family, the person who explains the most always loses. Meanwhile, I kept my interactions with my parents light, pleasant, and surface level, the way you talk to acquaintances you don't really want to let in. I knew they noticed, because my mother started making more comments about how we don't talk like we used to, and my dad asked me point blank if everything was okay between us. I told them I was just busy, which was true in more ways than they knew, because between work, my side income, and property hunting, I barely had the energy to fake intimacy with people who had shown me exactly how much I mattered when I needed something in return. The turning point came one evening when I was sitting at my kitchen table signing the paperwork on a place I'd found, small, solid, and completely mine, paid for with my own money and no one else's name on the deed. As I signed, I realized that in one quiet move, I had taken away the two biggest levers my family had over me, the ability to imply I needed their approval and the illusion that I needed their financial help. It wasn't just about owning property. It was about owning the fact that my future was now entirely separate from their power games. I didn't announce it. I didn't invite them over. I didn't even send a picture. I let the news travel the way all family news travels, through other people. It took less than 2 weeks for a cousin to mention in passing at a get-together that Aaron bought a place, and by the time my phone lit up with my mother's number later that night, I knew exactly how the conversation would go. Sure enough, she was all excitement and congratulations, asking when they could come see it, talking about bringing a bottle of wine, and hinting at how nice it will be for us to have a family space again. I smiled into the receiver and told her that things were really busy right now, that I was still getting settled, and that I'd let her know when it was a good time. We both knew that time was never going to come. And in that moment, I realized the turn was complete, not the dramatic, screaming kind of turn people expect in revenge stories, but the slow, deliberate pivot that leaves the other person realizing too late that you've already walked off the board and taken all your pieces with you. What they didn't understand yet, but soon would, was that the leverage had flipped. I didn't need their help, their approval, or even their attention anymore. They, on the other hand, were about to learn what it felt like to want something from me and find nothing but a polite, unshakable wall. And the first real test of that was coming sooner than they thought. The first test came faster than I expected, and it did not arrive as drama so much as logistics, which is the language my family has always needed me to translate. Because my father called one morning with the voice he uses when he is trying to sound calm while a problem is already in motion, and he said he had a minor procedure scheduled and the hospital wanted to confirm his medical proxy and emergency contacts. And he said my name automatically because it has always been my name in those forms. The person who shows up, signs things, knows where the insurance lies, and remembers which medication has the weird reaction, and he asked if I could come, just to make sure everything went smoothly, just to keep Mom from getting flustered, just to be the steady one like always, and for a second the old reflex lifted its head, that well-trained part of me that picks up a bag and a binder and rescues the day before anyone else realizes there was a chance of things going wrong. I sat there with the phone to my ear and looked at the clock, and in that small, quiet space I remembered how it felt to ask for help and be told that they could not, that things were tight, that I would understand because I am stable. And I heard my own voice come out steady and firm as I told him I hoped everything went well, that I cared, and that I could not be his proxy anymore, not because I love him less, but because I am not willing to be the only adult in the room whenever the stakes are high, and that it was time for Sophie to be listed first since Mom and Dad have always believed she deserved the first call when help was being handed out, and I said I would text him a short list of what the hospital needed so he could fill it out with her. And I let the silence stretch, because you cannot understand the shift until you feel it in your body, the moment you stop making their lives work at the expense of your own. He tried to laugh it off as me being busy, and I told him that was part of it, that I had built a life with boundaries that protect my health and my work, and that I was not going to rearrange those boundaries to serve a system that had refused me basic fairness when I needed it, and I said it in the tone you use with colleagues you respect but do not manage. And then I ended the call kindly and sent a simple text with instructions any adult could follow, and I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear because this, right here, was the cost landing where it belonged. I did not stop there because one firm no is a moment and I needed a structure, so that same afternoon I did the paperwork I had been putting off for months, the paperwork that turns a decision into a wall. And I filed the forms to revoke my status as healthcare proxy. I updated my own emergency contacts with people who actually show up for me, and I emailed my father's provider to remove my number from any default notifications. And then I called an estate attorney and had one calm conversation about removing myself as power of attorney and as executor for anything that assumes I will drop everything and carry the weight because I am the responsible one. And when the email confirmations came through, I felt something unclench in my shoulders that I did not know I was still holding. Predictably, my mother called that evening with a mixture of hurt and urgency, saying she thought we were past whatever had made me distant and asking me to consider, just this one time, because family should come together for health issues. And I said I agreed that family should come together when it matters, which is why I had stopped making it so easy for them to lean on me while treating me like I was made of steel and had no needs of my own, and I kept my tone warm enough that she could not accuse me of cruelty while keeping my position unmovable. And when she sighed and said she did not understand, I said I knew she did not, and that I had spent a long time making that misunderstanding painless, and I was done doing that now. The days that followed were a masterclass in what happens when you remove the free labor from a system that assumes it is owed, because little requests that used to show up as, "Hey, do you have the login for the insurance portal?" and "Can you scan and email that form from Dad's folder?" turned into panic texts from Sophie asking me where things were, and I sent one final message with a short list of professionals I had hired for myself over the years: a tax preparer, a patient advocate, a tech support service that handles elderly clients, and I wrote a line that was both true and sharp, that they could hire the help I had been providing for free, and that I was not available to be their unpaid staff anymore. And I left it at that without snark or flourish, because clarity does not need decoration to sting. On the financial front, I made two additional moves that sealed the door. The first purely practical and the second purely symbolic, and both mattered more than I expected. I froze my credit with the bureaus so that any attempt to run my information for co-signing or verification would require my explicit approval, which they would not get, and I drafted a clean, one-page letter titled, "Resignation from the role you assigned me," listing the tasks I had stopped doing and the dates the changes took effect, and I mailed a printed copy to my parents with a polite note that said, "I love you, I am safe, I wish you well, and this account is closed." And I included a single line that I knew would echo in their heads the next time they reached for their phones out of habit: that stability is not a person you get to spend, it is a choice you make for yourself. The hospital day came and went without me, and they managed, not gracefully but adequately, with a couple of hiccups that would have been avoided if I had been there, and the sky did not fall. And my father texted me a short thank you afterward that sounded like a man trying on a new language. And for the first time in my adult life, our relationship felt like two people standing on level ground instead of me kneeling to hold something up while everyone else pretended not to notice, and that feeling did not make me cruel or triumphant. It made me honest in a way I had not allowed myself to be. The family, of course, tried one last angle, which was nostalgia, the group text lighting up with old photos and soft jokes about how I used to be the one who organized everything, and I let the messages sit unread while I signed one last piece of paper for myself. The final closing document on the home that is mine alone, and I sent a single text hours later that said, "I am glad you are making new systems," and then I put the phone down and walked into my evening without wondering who needed me, and whether I should keep my ringer on in case, because the case is closed. Now when they say they are surprised I do not answer their calls, I tell the truth without heat, that I am surprised it took them this long to notice I was carrying the relationship like a backpack, and I say it once, and then I go back to my life. And if that sounds cold to someone who has never been the reliable one, I will accept their judgment and keep my peace, because this is not a story about turning into a villain, it is a story about finally refusing the part, and in case you are still waiting for a grand confrontation with shouting and slammed doors, there is none, because the real ending is cleaner and far more effective. The ending where I made sure every door they used to reach me for help they would not return is now locked from my side, the key destroyed, the map rewritten, and the lesson printed in letters large enough for anyone to read, that I did not disappear. I just stopped being free, and once you understand that, you understand why this was the only move that ever counted and why it worked.